We think that, besides the obvious of funding producers and providing investment opportunities, one of the things we think is important is connecting investors. And, many of these folks are urban, as you can imagine, not involved in the ag space, connecting them with the food system. Because, other than going to the grocery store or going to the steakhouse and buying a piece of meat, they don't really understand how it's produced. So when they take an ownership or make a loan to a rancher themselves, they can see a little bit more visibility in how those economies work and how what the ranching life's all about. And we work with a variety of producers, and they're all doing something a little bit different, and they're from different geographies across the United States. So there's a lot to learn there, and it's from our perspective, it's really interesting to work with all these different folks.
Hey, I'm Shaye, and I'm your host for the Casual Cattle Conversations podcast, the beef producer's place to explore new ideas and management practices to improve their lifestyle and operation. Now, before we dive into today's episode, I want to let you know that I am now open for speaking gigs. So if you want me to lead a workshop, be on a panel, or deliver a keynote at your next event, you can connect with me on my website, casualcattleconversations.com, and just use the contact box and I'll get back to you. So with that, let's dive right in to today's episode. Well, good morning, Chris. It is great to have you on the show today. And I know we're going to talk about harvest returns and how harvest returns is helping farmers and ranchers find funding for their operations in a non-traditional sense. So I think that's really exciting and interesting because that is such an important piece of farmers and ranchers being able to build up their operations. So I know we've had the opportunity to talk and visit in the past before about what you're doing, but I always like to hear it in my guests' words because it's their story. So, can you share with the audience what is Harvest Returns? What do you
Sure,
do?
and thanks for having me on, Shaye. So we started Harvest Returns back in 2016. And I kind of come from the investor perspective. My partner, Austin Manis, has more of the farming perspective. He grew up working on his family's farms in the Southeast US. And so initially our idea was, hey, we would like investors to be able to take part in ownership of a farm or a ranch. And as we started moving on and funding some of these things and building our investor base, we saw that there was a really strong need, especially in the ranching and the livestock and the cattle world, for outside investors, outside sources of funding besides just the kind of your traditional ag credit or bank loans for these operations to expand and to grow their business or even start new operations. We work with a lot of multi-generational folks that they've maybe got access to a piece of land in the family, but they're starting from scratch as far as cattle and infrastructure and things like that. So we started the business, and we've been picking up speed, and we've got a pool of about 13,000 investors, and they are really into ag and especially into livestock. And we're one of the few places out there like that where you can actually invest in a ranch.
So talk about how this funding is different compared to, getting a line of credit, getting a beginning farmer loan, whatever it may be, because that's what most farmers and ranchers are used to. That's kind of what we're taught to lean on and rely on. Whereas, outside in the business world, it is more common to have investors. That is an opportunity. I know when I was taking entrepreneurship courses, we were taught a bit about the investor world and what that can look like. So how does that process look different as far as funding? Maybe talk through what it looks like if someone works with you to give people an idea of what that looks like.
Mm-hmm. So producers come to us, and for several reasons. One is because they have already sort of tapped out maybe their credit with a bank, or they're just starting out. Maybe they aren't able to secure a loan at favorable terms with the ag credit. And the other reason they like us is because we're flexible. So we have different types of investments. So all of our investors come in looking for a couple things. One, they want to make sure they get their money back, their money safe, but also they want a nice return. And on the producer side, what that looks like is we've done loans. We've done loans that are secured by land, by cattle, by equipment, by cash flows of the business. And we've also done equity investments where we're actually investing, taking a piece of the operation, letting the producer operate the way they're going to produce. We're passive investors. We don't really have a say in, what type of, how they're running their operation. We don't want to have a say in how they're running their operation. Obviously, we do want to make sure that they're doing it in a favorable manner so we get to our returns. But producers come to us, we make an agreement, we talk about the terms, we go back and forth, and then we put it in front of our investors, and they decide how much they're going to invest. Some investors might write a $10,000 check. Some investors might write a $200,000 check, and we pool all those together, and then we either loan that money to their producer or we invest in the operation.
So who are these investors? Like, why are they taking interest in agriculture? Because I'm assuming they're usually people outside of ag, maybe not.
Yeah, for the most part, most of our investors are not in the ag space. Some of them certainly are. Some of them are retired ranchers, some of them, retired farmers, people in agribusiness, things like that. But for the most part, they're just people who are interested in agriculture. We think that, besides the obvious of funding producers and providing investment opportunities, one of the things we think is important is connecting investors. And, many of these folks are urban, as you can imagine, not involved in the ag space, connecting them with the food system, because, other than going to the grocery store or going to the steakhouse and buying a piece of meat, they don't really understand how it's produced. So when they take an ownership or make a loan to a rancher themselves, they can see a little bit more visibility in how those economies work and what the ranching life's all about. And we work with a variety of producers, and they're all doing something a little bit different, and they're from different geographies across the United States. So there's a lot to learn there, and it's from our perspective, it's really interesting to work with all these different folks.
So you mentioned that they're passive investors, so they don't necessarily have a say in how a farmer or rancher is operating. They don't necessarily have a say in that, but they do want to make sure that it is a viable business, that it is going to be successful.
Mm-hmm.
So then what does that look like? Like, how are you vetting these operations or entities to make sure that they are going to be successful and provide that return to your passive investors?
Yeah, so the two basic things we look for with a producer are, one, agronomy experience, doing what they've done, whether that means they've been in the ranching business for 20 years, or whether it means maybe they're in their young 20s and they're just starting out in their own business, but they've been working on, grandpa's ranch since they were, little bitty kids. So the being able to produce is obviously an important thing, or having a network of mentors, advisors, things like that if they are more junior in the production sort of realm, and then business sense. So there's a lot of different ways that you can bring on that sense. One, you can do it with outside advisors, mentors who have been producing for a while, or bringing together a team where you might have, husband and wife team, and one of them's focused on producing, one of them's focused on accounting and marketing and all those sorts of things, which as everybody knows, that's pretty common out here in the ranching world. So we like those teams. We like some level of experience, and then we're going to go through some pretty common vetting that any sort of bank might do, but also outside investors. We're going to look at their, if they've got a track record, if they've got financials for the past trailing years, we're going to want to see what they've actually done with their operation. If they're starting from scratch, we're going to see what you're going to do in the next 5 years, what your business plan looks like, how you're going to market, how you're going to produce. We're looking at all those things. We're not going to make a judgment. Well, we are going to make a judgment like, okay, this looks realistic or this is unrealistic. Are their assumptions about market prices, their assumptions about sales, their assumptions about how well they can do what they're going to do, are those accurate? And then we do background checks on the founders, which are pretty simple, same thing probably a bank would do. And then we package this all up and we put it in front of our investors. And we get, it's not just ranching, we do all different kinds of ag production, but only about 5% of the folks that come to us actually make it on the platform. And then of those that make it on the platform, it's about 80% that fund. So, and that's to their minimum target. So what we ask producer to do is say, hey, give us your best bet. If you need $5 million, tell us, to kind of get your dream operation going, tell us that. What's the lowest check you could take? Maybe that's $500,000 or $400,000. And that's really about the range of checks that we write to producers. And they come to us and we put it in front of the investors, and then they decide. Sometimes they really like the deal and they will invest, $1 million, $2 million. Other times they're like, okay, this is passable. We'll try, $400,000 or $500,000. And we've got that full range of producers, and not just producers, but we've done, we're actually raising capital for a small processing facility up in South Dakota right now. And we've done ag tech investments related to cattle. We've done dairy. Now we haven't done a dairy operation yet, but we've done, people that sell into the dairy industry. So agribusiness is not just producers.
That's really neat. So do you offer like assistance for people who want to get funding to like put together solid business plans, or even if they've already been approved, like if they want some advice to make sure that they're on the right track still? Do you have those support systems in place, or what does that look like?
So we do a little of that up front. If they come to us and they have a plan that looks pretty promising, maybe it's not the most beautiful thing, and maybe it's not it's not packaged in a way that our investors are really going to grasp it, but we think, hey, they're a great team. These guys know what they're doing. They just, they've never made a business plan. Most people have never made a business plan. So when I say make a business plan, that's a daunting task to a lot of folks. And I understand that, I haven't been there. So we do help with that. We show examples of like, hey, this is a really good one. Y'all just emulate this, make it look right. We've helped on the marketing side with like, hey, just go out and tell us about your operation, do it on your iPhone, send us that video, take some pictures of your cattle, and then we'll turn it into a beautiful little 2-minute pitch video. I've got some great marketing folks that do that for us. And that, being able to see the operation is what really helps the investors and hear from the producers is what really helps the investors make up their mind. Like, hey, this is a solid operator. He's got a great family. They're all in on this whole business. So let's take a risk and give them some money.
So are there specific types of producers and operations within the cattle space that you're really targeting or looking to work for? Like whether that's specific management practices, generational? I mean, I know you said you work with a wide variety of people,
Yeah.
but are there specifics that you really are looking for?
We do like this whole new, what's the word of the day, regenerative grazing or holistic grazing or, intensive grazing, whatever, that's sort of regenerating that. We do have some investors. Here's a funny story. One of our very first cattle investors or investments, it was a grass-fed ranch in Georgia. And I had a meeting with this guy. We don't know all our investors, but we know some of them. And I had a meeting with this guy in Dallas, and he's an urban guy, vegetarian. And he said, Chris, I don't eat meat, but I really like this ranch and what they're doing. So we're going to invest, however much he invested in it. So that's kind of the range of interesting investors that we have on the platform. Some don't even like meat for whatever reason, but they will invest in it.
That is really interesting, but I think, if there was a common ground that they were able to find, that's also really cool for them to want to support meat production and agriculture.
Yeah, and we are outspoken advocates of agriculture because ag is a big space. Everybody who's watching this is probably in the meat industry or at least likes meat, right? However, there are those vegetarians and vegans and people out there like that this is a completely foreign space to. So even if they don't decide to invest, if we can educate them a little bit on, the benefits of the meat industry from a, health perspective, from an environmental perspective, beef gets such a bad rap, and it's unfortunate as everybody here knows that, and it's not, some of it might be warranted, but most of it's not. So, part of our mission is to, support these American farmers and ranchers who are doing good things.
So I kind of want to shift gears a little bit and get back to the process again. So if producers already have existing loans, are they still able to work with you I mean, is it dependent on what they have going on with their bank already, or what does that look like?
Yeah, the easy answer is it depends. We have funded, we've done like second liens on land. We've done, some people have equipment loans, but they don't have loans on that. We've collateralized the cattle themselves. So, you buy a herd and it's insured, and you're growing that herd and you're going to sell it at some point. We've taken, that as collateral, and we're trying to get better at that by having, some of the cattle tracking systems involved. So we have a much better view of what the producer's doing. And sometimes if you've got too much debt, maybe you need equity. So maybe you need some outside investors to, or time, own part of your operation. And then we will structure it in a way that you can buy us out at a certain point. So, whether that's by refinancing the operation to pay us out at a rate, selling the operation. On the cattle side, we don't see that very often because it's, most of these folks are multi-generational and they just want to keep it going. But some of the other ag businesses, they, hey, we're gonna build this thing, we're gonna get it operating, and we're gonna sell it and then pay us off, or we're gonna take subsequent funding rounds. But like I said, that's not very common in the cattle space. And then we, so we're flexible and creative. That's the main thing that differentiates us from, say, a bank.
Okay, now back to the business plan standpoint, you
Mhm.
said that's a part of it, as it should be. But what if that plan needs to change? What's the flexibility there if they're working through part of it and they realize either, something within the business needs to shift a little bit
Mhm.
or something else changes? Like, where's the flexibility on that if they do need to make a shift?
Yeah, life happens. Our main concern is always getting our investors their money back. So if a producer is doing something and he finds out it's not working and they decide to pivot, that's what we call is like, hey, we were trying to do this cow calf operation, is just not working out, so we're going to get into something else. That's okay as long as we get our money back. Now we have that, I say that, and there's caveats, but for the most part, that's what we want, and that's why we secure our loans, or we have equity investments that have certain caveats in them. And it's happened. We had a producer who COVID happened, and they were just, their whole model just didn't work, and they were paying us interest, and they got out of the cattle business, and they continued to pay us interest till they sold the land and paid off the note. And yeah, that was fine. It was disappointing, but it worked out fine because nobody lost any money. And, in the end, we were all happy.
So what has been like the producer's response to this? How are people in agriculture liking having passive investors for funding instead of going to use traditional bank loans? Like, what has their response been?
Yeah. So the feedback we've gotten from our existing producers is obviously, when you write somebody a 500, 700, $800,000 check, and they've been, trying to get that for a while, they're happy. But they like the way we do business. They like the flexibility that we bring to the table that they may not have in other ag financing sources. And I'd say a lot of our business is actually a referral business, which really surprised me at first because, I didn't, everything's a small world, right? Cattle industry, people tend to know each other. Row crop industry, people tend to know each other, know all the players, all those sorts of things. So we've gotten referrals and, raised capital based on referrals, and that tends to work well for us.
So when you have producers work for you, what are some of the main challenges maybe that they face? Because
Mhm.
whether that's through mindset or it's just different, like what are some of those maybe hurdles or challenges that they need to overcome first or during that process?
Yeah, that's a question. So I think the first thing is, as we're in the let's decide to go forward and raise money for this business or not, is just getting their arms around the concept, because it's different. It's different in the ag world, and it's different especially in the ranching industry. So making sure everybody's on the same page is like, this is step one, this is what's going to happen. Step two, We're going to put this in front of our investors. Step 3 is they're going to decide how much to fund you. Step 4 is we're going to execute these notes, whether it's promissory note or a subscription agreement to invest into your operation, to your company. Step 5 is you're going to run the company. You're going to do what you told us you were going to do. You're going to provide us with updates, financials, and I would say, in the most part, our cattle folks are much better at that than some of the other folks that we work with, some of the other types of farms that we work with. And I think it's because they've got to constantly, their inventory is always changing. Their herds are expanding or contracting, or they're going to auction or selling or whatever, so they're just better I think they're better at numbers in a lot of ways than some other types of producers. And then just making sure that they are, on the same page with us and our investors as far as what the expectation. So a lot of it's education upfront and then ongoing.
Do the investors ever go out to the operations to see what's going on? I mean, you talked about that education side of it. So I'm just curious, that I could see that being really cool. I could also see people not wanting people to be out there. So I'm just curious what you see.
Yeah. And so one of the stipulations that we do make when we work with a producer is, hey, we've got investors and they're writing checks, $10,000, $100,000, that they may want to come visit you, they're passing through town or whatever. So that's part of the deal, that our expectation is, whether it's us, we will go out and inspect operations. Just, hey, are there cows? We're not going to do like an audit, but we're going to say, all right, they're looking, they're doing what they said they were doing. It looks like they're operating. Everything's good. And part of that is just to make sure see if there's anything we can do for the producers. But yeah, visiting the ranches. One of them, one of our producers, even, he made a whole business out of, or a, business line where he gives these ranch tours, kind of agritourism, and they go and they visit the fields and they check out the cattle, and he runs through the whole sort of, he's a regenerative guy. He runs through the whole sort of thing. And then they go and they sit around the campfire and have hamburgers, or, some sort of his products. So I think that's, I think that's awesome, because one, it's helping him make a little bit more revenue, but also, bringing not just investors, but that local community a little closer to the ranch. And this guy happens to be operating outside of San Diego, so he's within a pretty close proximity, an hour drive to big urban centers in LA and San Diego. So he can do that. A lot of our ranchers up in the Great Plains, like, you land in an airport, you got 6 more hours to drive to get to the ranch. So it's a little different situation.
I know I'm personally an hour from the closest airport, and that airport only has 4 terminals. So
yeah, we've got producers in Montana and Idaho and places like that where it can be a bit of a haul.
Have you seen a lot of producers trying to do like agritourism, or even just other avenues of trying to create additional revenue streams off the land they're already farming or already ranching? I mean, is that a trend you're kind of seeing? I know I've talked about it before. It's been over a year. We've talked about it on the show with a different group, but I'm just curious what that looks like.
We've seen a little of that. One of the things that we like and that we've seen more and more of is kind of that direct to consumer marketing. So, I mean, we know how this business works. You got producers, you got sale barns, you got feedlots, you got, big packing houses, and you've got any variety of those from small to large, right? From the big 4 packers of the world down to, smaller mom and pop, which we're raising money for one of those 25 head per day processing facilities right now. So all those people get a piece of that cattle that the producer, works really hard to get going, or, has some piece of that, whether it's cow calf or background or whatever that they are in the process. And so we like producers who are like trying to capture more of that value chain on beef. So whether it's, they sell some of their meat, maybe some of their cattle to auction, maybe some goes to some sort of direct to consumer sort of thing where they're doing their own branding. And the most successful ones seem to be really good at the marketing piece as well. I'm sure I know you've had folks like that on your podcast. So yeah, we see that. it's a big industry, and not every producer can do that, but some of them certainly can, and we like to work with those folks.
Well, thank you for explaining that. Now, you really get to see the business side of farms and ranches. And sometimes I do really think as an industry, cattle producers are getting better about viewing their operations as businesses and not just lifestyles. But I'm always curious because it's still a shift that's happening. So, what are some of the biggest mistakes you see people make on the business side of their operations? Because you said you're not really approving a whole lot of people for funding, it sounds like. Was that 5% that you said
Yeah,
earlier?
and that's all. And I would venture that I don't know the statistic, but on the cattle side, it's probably a little higher than that. 5% is all the deals that come to us, but cattle side's higher. We definitely have a higher, we're basically 100%. Like every cattle deal that has made it to the platform has funded, which it's only about 78, 79 for other types of businesses. Because like I said, we like cattle, and it's been done well for us, and it's done well for our investors. So mistakes, I don't know. I'd say, it is a commodity business for the most part. So differentiating yourself from that commodity, or, reducing that risk is important. But, one of the things about business, and especially on our kind of business, which is investing, is risk management, right? So if a producer doesn't understand what his or her risks are, that's a problem. So whether that's, just the death rate of the cattle happens, disease happens, calves freeze to death, all those sorts of things. Knowing that and mitigating against it with insurance, the pricing, fluctuations. So whether they're doing some kind of hedging or some kind of, forward contracts or whatever that looks like. And these, of course, we're talking a certain size. If you're just a hobby rancher, this stuff probably doesn't apply to you, because you're probably not going to raise money with us. You're just, and if you come to us, we're probably going to say, hey, that's just not a significant enough operation for us to invest in. But understanding your numbers is just a big part of the deal. There's all kinds of ag extension programs out there. There's universities that are willing to, have students work on projects, for a rancher. There's ranch management. Man, we have a great ranch management certification here at Fort Worth at TCU, the ranch management program there. There's all these sorts of resources out there that the average producer, if they spend a little time, they can reach out to and help them formulate their business plan, get help with producing. And if they're not taking advantage of that, that's on them. That's a problem, because there's plenty of resources out there.
All right. Well, Chris, thank you very much for your time today. As we wrap up, what final message do you want to leave the audience with, whether that's about running their cattle businesses or getting involved with harvest returns?
Well, I'm not going to give any production advice, because that's just not my thing. But if you want to, if you're thinking about bringing in some capital, maybe you've had a couple conversations with the bank and they've told you no, or they can do some of what you want, but not as much as you want to get to where your dreams are. Just come talk to us. You don't have to have a business plan right away. We have a couple conversations, kind of point you in the right direction, tell you what you need to do. And, you can call us, you can go to our social media, you can email us. Harvestreturns.com is where you start at. So we'd be happy to talk to you.
Absolutely. And I'll make sure that link is also in the show notes so that people can easily find you. Thank you again, Chris.
Thanks, Shaye.
And that's a wrap on that one, folks. Thank you for tuning in today and joining in on the conversation. Be sure to take this a step further and take the advice you learned and implement it on your operation. If you want to have a conversation about it, head over to my social media and send me a DM by following @CattleConvos and connecting with me there. Have a great day.